All right, good day to all of you. It has been a while since I have recorded. Today I'm going to do a twofer for the movie. So, two movies, both came out in 1996, continuing again with that theme of years that ended six. The first movie we're going to look at is a movie called The Substitute, and so starring Tom Berenger, and so we're going to get that trailer playing.
I want you out of here! Both of you! Out! Out!
What were his exact words?
That if I didn't back off, I'd wish I did.
I can't boot him out without definite proof of wrongdoing.
This guy is dangerous.
I've never been so happy to see anybody in my whole life.
What's going on?
My students are trying to kill
Hero
me.
of the Cleveland Indians. Yep.
My name's Smith. I'm her substitute.
Winston Sadmore.
Oh, good to meet you.
You're not one of our regular subs.
Yo, Freddy Krueger, knock it off. It's not a manicure shop. I'm in charge of this class.
You ever been shot, Mr. Whatever your name is?
Yeah, I've been shot.
Who is he?
The other day I was talking and I just happened to glance back
Batman,
and the
I
weirdest
think.
thing happened.
Probably.
What?
They were listening.
Wait till he's off school grounds. I don't want to kill him right off.
Life's a chess game, Juan. This is a crucial move. I want you to think it over.
You are history.
When we're done, I want you to say I'm sorry.
No talking in the library.
So there you have it. The movie The Substitute came out, like I said, in 1996. It's an interesting movie to watch because actually a couple days ago I was in Phoenix, and I'm going to talk about my experience at the Synodical Convention in other videos. But when I was in Phoenix, I happened to be in the hotel one of the nights before the convention started, and I decided to watch the movie Kindergarten Cop. And Kindergarten Cop was a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's this idea of an undercover police officer ending up teaching a kindergarten. And it ends up being very comedic, and it's got a little bit of action because it's Schwarzenegger, and it's a law enforcement thing, but it's got a lot more of a comedy slant to it. And it's supposed to be in, kind of a very, down to earth, white suburbia, kind of suburbia-esque town. So it's a very different thing. Well, the Substitute's kind of bringing the question. It's like, what if you had somebody who had this secret background teaching a high school? And not just a high school. We're talking about a situation. So for those who are not familiar with what the world was like in the 1980s and the 1990s when it came to crime, the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, the 70s was absolutely horrible in this country for crime. It was, the news, sometimes we watch the news and we think that things are so horrible now, but really when you compare it to what it was 30, 40 years ago, it's not as bad. It really isn't, statistically speaking. What has happened though is we have, social media. We have 24 hours a day news. When I say 24 hours of news, I don't just mean CNN and Fox News or MSNBC. I mean, we have 24/7 news because of the internet. And so things and when you compound it whenever anything breaks, any story breaks, it's on the news within moments. I mean, whenever a celebrity dies, you find out like within an hour or whatever, and it's all over the internet, and everybody knows about it. And so, so the thing is, I bring that up because when big things happen, when a criminal activity happens, where there's a shooting or a stabbing or whatever, it's all over the news, all over the world, and the news within a matter of moments, and without any consideration to what the extremity of the situation, it is all over. And so we kind of get this idea, because we are bombarded by this image, bombarded by this news, we think it's much worse. Well, in the 90s, it was pretty rough. And if you actually go research, I had to do some digging because I was wondering, because what I am familiar with in terms of the crime trends of the 90s, the worst of it was in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And it was very much reflected in movies. Like, you think about some of your really popular movies like RoboCop or um, you know, Batman. Um, ah, I'm not really doing really well thinking that there are movies that normally would come to my mind. At the moment, they're not. But there was a lot of movies in the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, really Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original movie, 1990. There's these movies that really focused upon the fact that that crime was a major problem. Well, by the time 96 rolls around, that type of theme in movies is kind of fading away. And that's why it kind of struck me that The Substitute, I was surprised that The Substitute came out in 1996. I thought it came out in the 80s. Because, well, for one, it's Tom Berenger, who, when I think of Tom Berenger, I think of the movie Major League, and he was the catcher, and he had the big hit that won got them into the playoffs or whatever. Uh, but and then when I think about like these high crime movies, think of like uh talk about crime in high school, you think of like Lean on Me. I gotta think, when did Dangerous Minds come out? I gotta pause and look that up. I guess it's a good thing I paused, because Dangerous Minds came out in 1995. That was 1 year earlier, and so I guess that mindset was still lurking within film, and The Substitute carries it. And so it is kind of that whole thing of like, what if, you know, and if when I did look through the history and the news of it, it looks like Miami, where this takes place. Yeah, Miami was really bad in crime. It's especially in the high schools. Some of the high schools were really rough situations, and so I think this is kind of you watch this movie. It's kind of they criticize it of the white savior complex type thing, and I kind of wonder, um I don't hmm, I don't know if it mattered if it was white or black. I have to think about that a little bit more. But either way, I mean, that was a big conversation. Like, people criticize that of Dangerous Minds, even though Dangerous Minds are based on a real person. Um so But it is kind of that wishful thinking. Like, imagine if you were in a school like that, and you kind of wish that, what if wouldn't you love it if you could actually learn again in the midst of um, this school that's overrun by crime? And wouldn't it be cool if, like, a Batman type person secretly became my teacher and, um, you know, put things back in order? And that's kind of what this is. I mean, obviously it's not Batman, but it's a guy that's he's a former CIA or mercenary or whatever, special ops, and he's the one that ends up teaching these kids after his fiance or girlfriend or whatever the relationship is. She's beaten, she's attacked, and so he substitutes for her. And so there's a few things I'd like to. So how is the movie? Um, I haven't put in a reading yet. I don't think, did I? Okay, I guess I gave it 3 stars. I don't know if I give it. I must have given it 3 stars on accident or something. But I kind of see this more of a 2.5 star. The movie is. I like the concept of it. I think it is kind of a neat concept. It's like, basically, it's a more matured, um, more serious version of what Kindergarten Cop was. But a lot of the problems are in some of the execution. They didn't get any really big actors in there. Tom Berenger. I mean, I'm looking at the list of actors you see right on there on the list. A lot of them are basically what we would call C level actors at best. Um, so you really didn't. It was kind of lacking in that regard. Uh, the fighting. This is kind of a problem in a lot of movies. I think we're kind of spoiled nowadays. So we've lived in a generation of John Wick, Jason Bourne, uh, even Taken with Liam Neeson's Taken movies. We've had this history of these really heavy action fighting type people, and these guys that could really do good combat, good fighting. Even the Batman movies. And so when you go back and watch movies like that, it's really the combat scenes are very kind of lacking. Um, the other thing is I don't. There's things that happen in the movie where the like for example, there's Mark Anthony who he plays a student and he's kind of big in the gang. I think what was it called, the KOD? I think was the name of it. And when he when he's eventually killed and it's right in front of the teacher. I mean, I feel like the teacher would have been his fiance. I feel like she would have been heartbroken seeing that as a teacher. I mean, relieved that she's been saved and everything, but there's got to be some type of heartbrokenness that it came to that with somebody who was in her classroom and she hoped for. Maybe not, given what how horrible this kid was. Maybe that's why. I kind of would have also liked at the end of the movie. I would have liked to seen, the crash of Ernie Hudson, Rollet, who he plays the principal, who turns out to be corrupt. I love to see the consequences that came from that. I would have liked to seen the school afterwards. Maybe is this like the beginning of a path forward for this school, for good things happening? I would have liked to have seen some of that. Um, but I was thinking about so looking at this from a pastoral perspective. What are the questions to have? What are the things to kind of talk about from a pastoral perspective? I'd say that probably the two biggest things that I'd point to. I mean, obviously, we could talk about vigilantism. Is that right or wrong? That's probably good for a superhero type film. I'm not going to go dive into that. Obviously, we could talk about the lying and the deceitfulness that made it so that Shale, or as he called him, Mr. Smith, um, for him to be the substitute. We could talk about that. You know, that's maybe that's worthy of a conversation. Is Was he right to do what he did? And maybe not. Could he turn to the police? No, because the police are corrupt. Rollet has them in his pocket. So, when you're forced into a corner, what do you do for the sake of all these kids and what's going on, for the sake of the kids, for the sake of those who want for these kids to succeed? So, that would be a good conversation to have if if somebody were wanting to do a Bible study or whatever, or a discussion, use not a movie. That would be a good one to start with. Is the morality of the deceit? Is there a point where deceit is acceptable? Um, think of Exodus and the familiar case of the the women who or the midwives who they lied about the Hebrew children to save their lives from the hands of Pharaoh. That's example of that. It is the age old question: what do you do? Is there a point where lying and deceit is acceptable, or maybe it's a case of sin boldly and rely upon God's grace? That's kind of good conversation. Second thing I kind of like, there's this one little moment in this movie. So he plays this substitute and he's teaching the kids. And he actually finds himself eventually liking it, enjoying when the students are just glued into what he's saying and they're paying attention. And he said, he's rehashing this to Jane, his girlfriend, fiance, whatever. And he says, there's this wonderful moment where I was talking and I looked and they were listening. And I could tell you, in my role as a pastor, I got to actually go all the way back. First time I remember that, because this is that first time moment as he's describing. The first time he realizes that these teenagers are actually listening to what he's saying. Mine, I would have to go actually back before I was a pastor, before I was even in seminary, before I even was going to a Concordia. So I went to Concordia University, Wisconsin, but before that, so I graduated from Ankeny, Iowa, Ankeny High School, and in between that time period, I was kind of at a point of wandering, not sure what I wanted to do, and then God kind of kicked me in the rear, woke me up, and woke me to the idea, the thought of being a pastor. And I still remember, and I realized that I started working, doing a lot of ways of helping at my home church, St. Paul Lutheran Church in Ankeny. And and one of the things I did is I helped with the youth ministry because the youth ministry was dead. We're in this, nobody was doing anything. And so, we had we had this church that was kind of starting to grow in a rapidly growing suburb of Des Moines, and we had no youth ministry. And so I kind of took it upon myself to see what I could do. I had very little experience, very little knowledge, but I just tried my best to do what I could do. And I remember that it was actually it was the day that I was going to go travel to Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, to visit it for the first time. And I remember this because I was going to drive through the night. We had youth group. It was on a Wednesday night. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was on a Wednesday. It's either a Sunday or a Wednesday, but we were having youth group. And I think we had about 7 or 8 kids. And I don't remember what I was teaching them. I can't remember what I was talking about. But I remember that moment realizing that the kids were glued in, listening, and absorbing what you were saying. And it is. So he describes this moment in the movie. He talks about this in the movie. And I hear that little bit. I'm like, and I think every teacher, pastor, anybody that's ever taught kids knows that special moment. And it's one of those moments that's almost addictive. Like you want that. The challenge is it doesn't come as often as you like. And the challenge is that, and the teacher expresses this in the movie. And the other challenge is that, you know, if it's addictive, it's what makes you want to do the job that you're doing. There's something wonderful about knowing that you taught and impacted a kid. And I love that little moment. So the third final point that I pull out on this movie is the detail of role A. So there's this teacher named Mr. Sherman, Daryl Sherman, and he is very much clinging to role A because he's in love with the idea of this successful, prosperous black man who is a leader. And he will defend role A no matter what. The evidence that's right before him. He refuses to believe it. And this is one of the things is that, and I'm not going to go too much into the racial part of it, because there's a racial aspect to it, but I'm not going to dig into that. But I would like to talk about the elevation of leaders and why we have to be careful about it. I mean, on the one hand, there is something to put the best construction. You know, don't bear false witness. This is an eighth commandment thing. But is there a point where we could push that too far? Where the evidence is all completely in our face that something is really rotten in Denmark, so to speak. And there's a certain point where we have to say, no, this is wrong, and I need to stand with this other guy against this corrupt leader. And this is a very relevant discussion because in Rollet's situation, he's selling drugs through this, using the school as a means to do it. Now, I'm a pastor, and now I don't know if any pastors have used the church as a means, an avenue to sell drugs. Maybe they have, and I'm sure it probably has happened. I'm going to guess it probably has happened. There's actually, if you listen to stories of mafia and all that, yeah, it's happened. But I'm thinking about something more recent and more relevant. It's the issue of, so when I was at the Synod convention last week, one of the resolutions that was passed was addressing the problem, the reality, and the horror and the evil of sexual misconduct, sexual sins on the part of church workers. Now, this could be pastors, DCEs, it could be Luther school teachers. It's happened in all different forms. And understand that I want to kind of get this out of the way, and I probably brought this up before, is when these things happen, people will say, well, look at that, another teacher, another religious leader has failed. And to be fair, that's true. That's accurate. And it's an absolute horrible tragedy. It's a horrible evil when this happens because, a pastor is placed into the position that he is, and his job is to preach the forgiveness of sins, to preach the law of God, and he's supposed to be above reproach. It doesn't mean that he's without sin. He's got sin, but there's sins, and then there's egregious sins. And I'm not talking about egregious sins in terms of our relationship with God. I'm talking about egregious sins in terms of our relationship with man. I mean, it's one thing to be like, you occasionally, you swear under your breath or something like that, or you get frustrated. You're driving a little bit too fast on the interstate. That's one thing. Is that sin? Yes. But it's a lot different than, hey, theft or adultery or crimes against children. I mean, children, Jesus gives extreme warnings against people who sin, against children who lead children astray. And so we should take these very seriously. And so this was an issue that's brought up at the convention. And so again, back to the thing is, people say, oh, another one failed. It happens. Why? Because the reality is predators will be drawn to places where the lack of a better term, the prey are present. And we hope that they're stupid enough that they make it obvious before they even get into the roles. A pastor, teacher, coach, nurse, doctor, whatever. We hope that would happen. But quite often, it's not found out. We don't know their predatory tendencies and evils until it happens. Now, hopefully we react and we do what's supposed to be done. But here, I return to the movie, but why this is relevant, it's the reality is what do we do? So in the case of this, like if this happened in a school, and who knows, maybe it has happened in a school and I don't know about it. But if this happens in a school, do you lose faith in all education and all educators? Hopefully not. You realize you don't put your faith, or do you lose, in the case of, Sherman's character, he's hoping and longing for this. He's grateful for a leader, a black man succeeding and leading and being a great influence on the community. Do you lose faith in that? No. You don't lose hope in that. You don't lose hope in people who happen to be black and happen to be a leader. You realize there's rotten people. And rotten people will find opportunity. Don't put don't put too much faith in human beings. It's the same thing with the pastor. Don't put too much faith in the pastors. That includes me. Because we're sinners. We are all sinners. We'll make mistakes. We'll say something stupid. And we're sinners. Put your faith needs to be in Christ above all else. Faith in him. Faith in his word. Now, obviously, so you pray for your leaders. You hold your leaders accountable. You do think the best for them. You put the best construction. You don't automatically think they're going to be failing, that they're doing evil things or whatever. But you stand on the hope of Christ. If and when that failure happens. Don't put too much faith in people. I mean, that's a harsh thing. Put faith in people, yeah, but not too much. There's a point where you could put someone on such a pedestal that you're blinded to what they do. And by the way, we do this with we definitely do this with our politicians. So those would be the three lessons I kind of would come out of this movie. You could talk about the role of lying. Secondly, the joy of teaching and being an influence on kids. But on the flip side, caution against putting people on a pedestal. All right, so that's movie number one. Movie number two, we are going to look at, it came out, again, 1996. So it came out in 1996, and it is a movie with a very different genre, very different style, but very much also, but much like the Substitute, it's a little bit dated, a little bit aged on account of quality and CGI in various ways. But we're going to look at it. The name of the movie is Dragonheart, starring Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery.
One 1,000 years ago, there lived a man of honor and a creature of legend.
He's the greatest dragon slayer there is! I personally have seen him slay almost 2 dragons.
Haven't had this sort of challenge in some time.
Not likely to again.
They were 2 sworn enemies.
How do you like the ride so far?
I will rid the world of every last one of you.
I am the last one. If you win, you'll be out of work.
Who formed an extraordinary alliance.
I hope you like it well done.
This knight, he's no dragon slayer.
We made a bargain, remember? 1 dragon put down, 1 bag of gold.
Well done, Boyd. That's even bigger than the last one.
Actually, he's about the same size.
This time, I'll collect the money, and you can die.
But when the forces of evil threatened the land...
When your kingdom minded, there are worse fates than death. Father!
They found there is no honor...
Men like you give people courage and hope.
...without risk.
I wanted to live!
And no friendship...
For I ain't to die, you must destroy me.
...without sacrifice.
I go to save the dragon! Who will go with me?
Universal Pictures presents a motion picture that will make you believe. Dragonheart.
All right, Dragonheart is the movie that came out in. Is the next one I'm looking at. So this one stars Dennis Quaid, Sean Connery, David Thewlis. You might know him from Harry Potter. Jason Isaac was also in there. Pete, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he plays Gilbert. But I recognize him from X-Men, or not X-Men, Jurassic Park Lost World. So those are some of the actors that are in this movie. And as you can watch, watch the trailer, it's an example. They probably show too much in the trailer. Same thing happened with Substitute. I think they show too much in the trailer. But the thing is this movie, the CGI is a bit dated, but it's one of these movies where it's like it's just on the edge of being something really, really good. And I don't know exactly what's missing in it. Like I don't know. I'm not gonna say it's a bad movie. It's an okay movie. Let's see. I'm gonna have to probably put a review on this thing. Um, just now, I didn't actually watch it just now, but probably give 2.5 stars, much like I did with The Substitute. Probably about the same review. Uh, like I said, I don't. But unlike with The Substitute, I could pin down what was missing. I don't know if I could really do it with Dragonheart. David Thewlis, I thought actually plays a pretty good villain. Uh, I do kind of find it funny. There's this whole story at the beginning where Dennis Quaid's character, who's this noble knight, is trying to track down Draco, this dragon, because he has revenge on him because he blames him for King Einon going evil, going corrupt. Which, by the way, that's going to be the topic I'm going to talk about in a second here. But the thing is, like, he meets him and he's like, "Do you know this dragon I'm looking for?" "Well, I may have known him." It's like, but it's Sean Connery. He has such a distinctively recognizable voice. And you heard him talk earlier in the movie. It's like, yeah, you sound like James Bond in the beginning. You sound like James Bond here. So I think you're the guy. So it's kind of hard to sell that he didn't know it was him. Unless they believe the idea that all dragons have the exact same voice. I guess maybe then it might work. But anyways, if that's the case, they somehow have to cover that in somewhere in the scenes to let us know that. But aside from that, it's that question. I like that little exploration was the dragon. We find out the question is he believes the dragon cursed the boy, and because Dennis Quaid's character, he mentors Einon to be this. He wants him to be a noble king, unlike his father, who was this total brute and total tyrant. And he wants him to be better than his father, and he ends up being this evil, vile man, maybe even worse. And he feels like he thought Draco cursed him, and it's kind of a good question that leads into this. This is, if you're going to look into, again, I view these movies from the perspective of a pastor, and I'm asking a lot of these things are going to look at as some of the ethical questions. And here's kind of more a philosophical, ethical, whatever, is what makes a person go wrong? That's a mystery. Because the thing is even as Bowen, Dennis Quaid's character, may have been teaching and mentoring him, the person that probably did have the biggest influence on him was still his father. If he saw this tyranny modeled in his father, maybe he longed to be his father and be even better at what his father did. You hope that he's kind-hearted, and that's what, Bowen's hoping that this would be a good man. But again, the question is like, what makes a person go truly evil? Now understand, first off, every one of us is born a sinner. Every one of us is born in rebellion to God. So what we're kind of talking about here is we're talking about in a relative sense. We're talking about relative to the world. What makes a Hitler become a Hitler? What makes a Joseph Stalin become a Joseph Stalin? What makes a Genghis Khan become a Genghis Khan? What leads to, a Mao type situation? What leads to wretchedness and evil in these rulers? The old adage is absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's not accurate. It's not actually not really true. Power doesn't corrupt. We in our sinful nature, corrupt power. We get that mixed up. It's not the power that's doing the corrupting, it's us doing the corrupting. Because we're the ones that bear the sinful nature. Power is just whatever. It's a neutral. It's neither good nor evil. It's what we do with it that can render it evil. In our sinful nature, we have an inclination because our sinful nature, ultimately, our core, is our desire is power. Power is our ultimate desire. I mean, the very first temptation in the garden was to be like God, and being a king, being a ruler, being an emperor, being a president, being the owner of a multi-billion-dollar, a billion-dollar company, whatever it may be. That is power, and that's getting us closer into the mindset of being like God, or at least being a God amongst others in our minds. See, ultimately it's neutral. But we covet it, we desire it, and when we get it, we will hold on to it, and we might even flaunt it and show it off because we want to be seen as powerful, power perceived. You know, power perceived is power known, and that actually is a line from The Substitute. Or power perceived is power achieved. That was the line. You know, is Einon falling under a similar thing? We teach kids, again, go back to The Substitute. She teaches this kid, played by Mark Anthony, and he ends up all these kids, and a lot of them, they're just totally a mess. Are the teachers failing? In the case of Einon, did his teacher fail? Somebody could even ask the question, did Jesus fail with Judas? It is a grand mystery. What makes a person go as far off as they do? It's a good question. One other thing I'd like to pull into for Dragonheart, this movie is now 30 years old, so I don't feel terribly bad about giving away what happens in the end. In the end of the movie, towards the end of the movie, there's this conundrum. They realize that the life of Einon, the king, and the life of the dragon are connected to each other. If the dragon dies, Einon dies. If Einon dies, the dragon dies. And Bowen, Dennis Quaid's character, realizes that Einon needs to die because he is very evil. And that leads to another discussion. Is there a point where it's acceptable to execute someone? And kind of a death penalty question. But he's faced with this, the dragon, Draco, voiced by Sean Connery. He's willing to die that this evil, tyrannical king would die as well. And his tyranny and his kingdom would come to an end. The question, this is what you call an ethical question. Is it right to do so? Because, this isn't just lying. This is ending a life. And in the story, you find that, you're familiar with the reality that Draco is the last of the dragons. And you're basically going to be responsible for the finality of the extinction of a species. This is a pretty weighted thing. And, the ends justify the means. That's, utilitarianism. The ends justify the means. By killing this good dragon, you killed this tyrannical ruler. The greatest good for the greatest majority type thing. And is that right? Is that ethical? Or again, is this one of those sin now and boldly and let grace abound? Rely on God's grace. And honestly, I don't think that would fall into this case because, again, there's a difference between lying and murder and killing something. Lying is less permanent. Executing someone is permanent. And we were talking, I mean, it's not a human, but it's a sentient being. We don't live in this reality. We have to deal with these type of things, but still, it's kind of the ethical question. To kill one that another may live. This is euthanasia. Does this? People would be better off if we just killed this one. Abortion plays into that idea. Kill the child in the womb that the one that is bearing the child may live. We have a long history of people doing bad, horrible, wretched things in the name of the greater good. The ends justify the means. And you could kind of tell where I'm leaning is it's a sad ending and it's tragic and understand, I mean granted, Draco chose. He is willing to. It's a complicated one. And definitely worth a good conversation. So there you go. There's my review of two movies from 1996, Dragonheart and The Substitute. I hope it's interesting. I hope even these little two movies, they're not too terribly long, spur up some conversation. So blessings. I'll come back to you later this week with some recordings about the convention in Phoenix. Blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.